Zohran in New York City, who's been running for mayor, a really great campaign. And maybe we can talk about some of the things that people really like about this campaign.
Our campaign is surging, and you want to know why? Because the ideas we're fighting for are popular. This month, for example, we got new polling that showed that 2/3 of New Yorkers support city-owned grocery stores, a policy we've championed for months that would guarantee cheaper groceries. But that's not all. A separate poll found 3/4 of New Yorkers support making buses free, like this one. As a state legislator, I won $15 million to fund a first-of-its-kind fare-free bus pilot that led to a 30% increase in weekday ridership and a 38.9% decrease in assaults on bus drivers. Now I'm running on a plan to make every bus fast and free. And finally, this week we found that nearly 80% of New Yorkers agree with my plan to freeze the rent for more than 2 million rent-stabilized tenants. Politics isn't always that complicated. We're in second place because we're fighting for everyday New Yorkers. So join us at ZohranForNYC.com and win a city that New Yorkers can actually afford.
And I have to say, as important as a lot of the other things we're going to talk about today, I think that this, campaign is probably one of the most important happening in the country right now. Not just because of the stakes of potential Cuomo administration in New York, but also because I think Zohran is showing a different kind of politics. Right? We've played him on this program before. People might remember because I was so inspired and happy to see the videos that he put together after Donald Trump won, where he did something that many liberals, many leftists even are afraid to do, which is went out and spoke to people who voted for Donald Trump and asked them why. This is somebody who actually has like a very serious vision, and I think a commitment to actually listen to people and hear where they are. And as we're seeing through these plans and the people who are sort of coming in and around this campaign, the capacity to be able to like inspire people to fight for a better future instead of just defending things from the constant onslaught from the right. So this is a campaign that we really, really want to see be successful. And he talked about all the why it's super popular, but there are some people who aren't very excited about these many plans, right, Matt?
There are. I just want to circle back, though, to the thing you said about buses and the little insertion there on public safety and how it's been, it's led to less assaults on drivers, I think, is at least one of the metrics cited. And that's an important thing because, I do think the left has been open politically, the people that run for office, to a shift in terms of perception of public safety. And it's not just perception. There was a rise during COVID of things like assaults and that sort of thing. And what has changed that, as switched that around, is the social element, which is to say more people are back on the subway, including the rise from the congestion pricing that was ultimately implemented. More people on the trains has led to safer commutes. And that would have the same effect on buses stands to reason. And when there's fewer people on buses, then this is kind of common sense to anyone who's used public transportation. The only time I'm ever worried is when it's 3 a.m. and I'm on with one other person and they're acting erratically, right? You have more people doing this than there's safety in numbers, literally. That's not just, so I liked that emphasized. But yes, there are certain people upset about this. And one of these guys goes by the name of The Rich. Which nice. I didn't make these people up for those purposes of this investigation here. It says, wait until this guy finds out the profit margin of grocery stores is around 3% now. I had a response to this that kind of confused a large amount of people that didn't know where I was coming from. So let's just put this up here. I said, yeah, dumbass, that's why you can't leave running them to capitalists. And I got a response here. I can't tell if you think 3% is too high or too low from Spencer Gray. There just really isn't that much juice to squeeze in groceries. Capitalists aren't extracting that much surplus at that level. Not the point, buddy, because the actual point is this is market failure. This is capitalism failing to deliver on what it is trusted by people like you to deliver, which is, in this case, groceries. There's a reason that polling is so severe. It's 2-1 in favor of this. It's because New York has a high need for supermarkets. Mm-hmm. And the people that are in rich neighborhoods, or actually some of those people probably don't even live in New York, don't give a shit about that. But it overlaps highly with poverty and rate of food hardship. This is just simple. There is a failure already happening, right? And people want to point to me to the Khrushchev Nixon, meeting when Nixon was vice president. That says like, oh, look at how impressed they are with our supermarkets, brother. My supermarket don't look like that one. Okay, I like my supermarket because I can walk to it, but it ain't looking like that. Okay. Like I gotta walk quite a ways before one looks that nice and that stocked, and where I don't need to check the meat really fucking well. Okay, like you can fantasize that we live in Nixon's world still. We do not. We live in a world where people have trouble finding groceries because capitalists can't deliver on that.
Look, I mean, let's get into some of this here, because this is one of those moments where what Zohran is talking about is actually like something that government used to be able to do, right? You think about something like the electrification of the South. Private companies said, hey, we don't need to give electricity to those hillbillies. We'll never be able to get a return of our investment. Well, FDR says, well, that seems to be a problem. So we will come up with a model that will work. Sometimes the government will do it, like the Tennessee Valley Authority, or work to help out small cooperatives meet that need. But we're going to make sure that everybody in the United States of America can turn on a light bulb in their house, right? That was just like the kind of civic mindedness that we used to have in this country that has completely disappeared. Now, on the question of grocery stores in particular, this is a moment where there are plenty of places where it is easy to get very nice produce to be able to get groceries, and there are also places across New York City in particular where it is difficult. And this point that they're trying to make to you, Matt, is like, whoa, it's hard to make a profit in grocery stores. Is exactly why sometimes you need the government to be able to come in and to provide services where the free market is failing and unable to make it. So again, if it is one of those things where, the profit margin is too low, well, what option does a capitalist have, to make up that? Well, they raise prices. Problem is that a supermarket exists in a physical location, which means that it's going to have to be affordable and operate for the people who live around you. Well, if you start raising the prices to extremely high New York prices, I mean, I've seen some of the egg prices and food prices in certain parts of New York. Well, that's not going to be affordable for people who live in working class neighborhoods in New York. So having the government come in and say, hey, we don't have a need to make profit on these kind of things. We can organize and be able to utilize our city money to be able to sort of absorb these costs of doing business. Why not? Now, here are the actual arguments that will be made against that actually have some credence to them, right? One is that you don't want it to be a situation where you are just kind of bleeding money for an inferior project, right? So the idea being that city-run grocery stores are just going to be unprofitable forever. Well, the fact of the matter is that, first off, that private grocery stores are unprofitable for the first few years, right? That's why you invest money up front, and it sometimes takes a few years for these kind of things to get off of the ground. Government's a really nice thing because it can actually invest and hold on to that kind of investment much longer than a private capitalist would, because capitalists will run out of money, or their investors will start saying, hey, we don't want to be involved in this anymore. The government actually has the capability and the capacity to hold on and maintain investment in an area for longer. Two, we were talking about some of the low profitability in the grocery stores. One of the nice things that Zohran has proposed is that these city-owned grocery stores would get a good deal from the government. They wouldn't have to pay property taxes. And if they were able to be used on city-owned land or empty lots, they would do that as well. So already we see a massive overhead cut into the grocery store business model that could generate lower prices for everyday folks and mean that it's not so much cost upon upon those city-run grocery stores. The last one is a very good point, and this is something that has happened throughout throughout American history when it comes to kind of cooperatively run organizations or even state-owned enterprises, is remembering that there is an entire supply chain that goes into these kind of things. And the worry is that a city-run grocery store would not be able to get the favorable prices that from wholesalers that some of the big stores have. And this is something that is actually a fundamental issue in American grocery stores, even dropping, city-run, community-run, county-run grocery stores, is the fact of the matter is that's why you don't see independent grocery stores in this country anymore, is because Walmart and Kroger and those big grocery stores have specific deals with food producers and food companies where they get a lower price than what everyone else pays. And this is one of the big reasons why we have seen so much consolidation in that industry. Well, the fact of the matter is New York is not a small place, and this is not a small plan. So they would absolutely have the same capacities to be able to entice sellers to be able to sell to them. And the only way that they wouldn't would be is if those sellers were operating in bad faith, literally saying, we want this program to fail. So we won't negotiate, right? And that is something where I think somebody like Zohran or somebody engaged in politics, would have to have the capacity and the courage to come out and say, like, look, these capitalists are actually trying to rig the game because they are uninterested in having a good life for everyday folks. They don't want people to be able to have affordable groceries, right? And you would actually have to be able to put political pressure on them, which is an advantage that you have, by the way, as a popularly elected official versus, I don't know, like a small town grocer who's going up against the big box stores.
Yeah, exactly. And if there's one city that can do this, because it really does take economies of scale, I think, to really compete here, it's New York City,
Yeah.
right? New York fucking city. There's also an antitrust here that I found kind of persuasive. Just really quickly, there's an Atlantic piece, which I loathe to always share, but the Great Grocery Squeeze. This is basically predicated on this work, but here it goes into the Robertson-Patman Act. That's that Wright Patman from Texas. But the idea was basically policy shift that decimated local grocery stores. It's an interesting piece because it points out that, like, in the 90s when they started talking about food deserts, it was sort of a new thing. And part of this is because we've let the major companies just get huge. About, right? Exactly. Yeah. And in part because and it's funny, like, Trump all of a sudden looks back to, like, laws passed by John Adams to, like, go after political enemies in this country. This law is still on the books that would say, hey, if you sell, say, one thing to Whole Foods, you have to give independent grocers the same deal on that. You can't give the big guys the deal because ultimately then they're going to destroy the smaller companies. And we just don't. And Lena Khan, there's some talk about Lena Khan revitalizing that. But ultimately, like, this needs to be a part of how business is done. But we don't enforce it because who gives a fuck about that stuff anymore? And you see, this is inequality. This is, and to the extent that these sorts of giant corporations are the only way to efficiently do this, then we should have national control over them.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think it's kind of as simple as that. And I think in general, a municipal run grocery system, I think is something worth fighting for. I think ideally you'd have these things be federally or state run at the largest possible scale. One of the things is that when we take out the profit motive, when we take out private interest, we get to talk about social good. And that's how you would judge something like a city-run grocery store. It's like, how much food is it providing for people? What are the better health outcomes for folks? I mean, there's been a lot of fucking talk from the right wing now about, they don't like snacky foods, right? They don't want Frito-Lays in high schools or in bodegas or whatever. Well, this is a great opportunity to put your money where your mouth is. If you want people to eat better food, fresher produce, support Zohran and his campaign for mayor. I think that this is a really exciting thing, and I think that there should be a lot more talk about solutions like this, which I think are creative, they're inspiring, and they get people engaged in a way much, much more mobilizing and motivating than Chuck Schumer kind of sitting and muttering to himself in a chair about going to war with Iran.
It's a new future. I mean, I know you saw in the research, there's one in Baldwin, Florida.
We talked about. Remember that? Yeah.
Yeah. And, they've ultimately went under because guess what? They were trying to do something that a private grocery store also couldn't do. And they don't have the economies of scale. Like, right, Baldwin, Florida, no, you need that to be a statewide, or at least a giant municipality like Miami or someone, because again, like you just, this economies of scale, state power, right? This isn't just it's not. But I mean, I also obviously appreciate the effort and the people that were able to get groceries there for a half decade longer than they would have, were well served.
And look, and there's the one, what I believe in Erie, Kansas, that's still functioning. This is something that works. This is something that's happened throughout American history. And it's just, I mean, I have a kind of historical example about like the populists back in the day, but they sort of went through this too, is sort of recognizing that like, these ideas have merit, right? For them, it was the exchanges, right? The idea that like the cotton conglomerates basically have too much power. So if we can organize ourselves as like a collective, as the farmers who sell cotton, we can get an advantage. The problem is that when they were doing on a kind of local level, they could always get undermined by someone else, or literal capital boycotts. Like they would say, we won't buy from these kind of left-wing groups. They realized that politically what they had to do was to have these things be run on the mass scale, right, on the state level. And this ends up becoming a big thing with the nonpartisan league in North Dakota and all this kind of stuff. So the point that I'm getting at is not that like, oh, well, because if you try this in a very specific area, and it works, by the way, for a few years until the sellers decide that they want to wage war on these kind of systems, doesn't mean that they're debunked now. It means that like, oh yeah, it does seem like you probably need to be able to have an investment. You do need to have scale, just like anything that you do. I don't know. It's like those kind of nitpicky. Nitpicky isn't even the right word, because they're bad faith. Because anyone who's serious about this, I will accept, for example, if you want to argue against these things, that like, yeah, sourcing will be an issue. You're going to have to figure out how to deal with the big retailers to do that. I get that. I think that's a real thing. I think Zohran does as well, because he's not just talking out of his ass about this. They're actually talking about a plan. Those are real critiques, right? That doesn't mean that they're right. Those are like fair things to talk about. Fucking talking about Baldwin, after years of operating and then failing after the pandemic, when there was a massive grocery crisis across the United States of America.
Everywhere is getting us hosed.
It's not serious. It's not serious.
Like, this country is a joke when it comes to groceries. People have to go to fucking dollar stores in strip malls. It is a shame, and it should be. And all of this is just propaganda to try to like tell ourselves a nice story about it, so we don't have to actually do anything. And like, yeah, some of those people, look, if you fundamentally don't give a fuck that people in like a lot of neighborhoods can't get groceries, and you're worried about tax dollars, like, yeah, fine, you're not on the team. Good luck to you. But like, good luck.
Well, also, they're in the minority. And this is the biggest thing, is like, hey, y'all can fucking complain to yourself, and you guys can start a lot of chat rooms about how right you are and how much you hope that grandma can't get a carrot. But the rest of us are very excited about plans like this, and we're going to fight as hard as we can to put them into practice.
Yep.
Folks, we got a lot more to get to, so I think we got to get to it. As much as I'd love to keep on this, I'll just say, I know our audience is smart and already engaged, but if you aren't already, this is something you should check out. They've already raised enough money, so donating's not even a question at this point. See if there's a way to get involved, or if anything, just spread the word, because I think seeing this, and hopefully seeing this invigorate some kind of municipal level politics that's bold like this, I think would be a really great thing. Because you see, there's a reason that this guy is number two, and it's because he's talking about things like this, that every fucking consultant and even I think well-meaning progressive who'd be scared of ever being criticized for being quote unquote impractical or bold or whatnot. Hopefully this actually inspires some people to start doing that in their area as well.
Could not be more pronounced that the sort of standard progressives are stuck in the mud, trying to get any traction again. And it's Zohran who has outperformed definitely in their projections when they started this.